The rain was falling hard that evening in Chicago. The kind of rain that makes people run for cover and curse under their breath. But inside Le Royale, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, everything was warm, golden, and perfect. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved silently between tables. The smell of truffle and aged wine filled the air. This was a place where a single meal could cost more than what some families earned in a month. And sitting at the best table, right by the window, was Vincent Thornton. At 56 years old, Vincent was worth more than $90 million. He owned buildings, hotels, shopping malls. His face had appeared on the covers of business magazines. People whispered his name with respect and fear. He was the kind of man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. But if you looked closely at Vincent that evening, you would notice something. His eyes were empty. Not angry. Not sad. Just empty. Like a house where nobody lived anymore. 7 years ago, Vincent had lost everything that mattered. His wife, Catherine, and his little daughter, Rosie, had died in a car accident on a snowy December night. Vincent wasn't in the car. He was at a business meeting. He chose work over a family dinner. And that choice had haunted him every single day since. After the funeral, something inside Vincent had died too. He stopped laughing. He stopped caring. He built walls around his heart so high that nobody could climb over them. He became cold, bitter, and sometimes even cruel. It was easier that way. If you don't let anyone in, nobody can hurt you. That rainy evening, Vincent was eating alone, as usual. He had just finished a deal worth $12 million, but he felt nothing. No joy, no excitement, just the same hollow feeling he always carried. Then he heard the commotion near the entrance. A small voice was saying something. Then the manager's voice, sharp and annoyed. Then the small voice again. This time pleading. Vincent looked up from his steak. Near the front door stood a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 8 or 9. Her clothes were old and worn. Her shoes had holes in them. Her dark hair was wet from the rain and stuck to her thin face. But what caught Vincent's attention was what she was holding. A violin case. Old, scratched, held together with tape in some places. The manager, a tall man with a thin mustache, was blocking her way. His face showed disgust, like he was looking at a rat that had wandered into his kitchen. "I told you already, you cannot come in here," the manager hissed. "This is not a place for beggars. Leave now before I call the police." "Please, sir," the girl said. Her voice was small but steady. "I'm not begging. I just want to play one song. Just one. Maybe some people will like it and give me something. It's for the orphanage. We need money for food and medicine." "I don't care what you need," the manager snapped. "Get out." He grabbed her arm and started pushing her toward the door. Something stirred inside Vincent. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way the girl didn't cry, even though she was being treated so badly. Maybe it was how she held onto that violin case like it was the most precious thing in the world. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something he didn't want to think about. "Stop," Vincent said loudly. His voice cut through the restaurant like a knife. Everyone turned to look at him. The manager froze. The little girl looked up with wide, surprised eyes. Vincent stood and walked slowly toward them. His expensive shoes clicked against the marble floor. When he reached them, he looked down at the girl with an expression that was hard to read. "Let her go," he said to the manager. "But sir, she's just a street child. She doesn't belong." "I said let her go." The manager released her arm immediately. Nobody argued with Vincent Thornton. Vincent studied the girl for a long moment. She was so small, so fragile. Her hands were rough and chapped from cold. But her eyes were something else. They were deep brown, and they held a kind of strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. "What's your name?" Vincent asked. "Mila, sir." "Mila." He repeated it like he was tasting the word. "And you want to play violin for these people? You think they want to hear some orphans scratch away at a broken instrument while they eat their $100 meals?" Some people in the restaurant chuckled. The manager smiled nervously. Mila's face remained calm. "I don't know if they want to hear me, sir. But I know I can play. Mr. Joe taught me." He said I was good. Mr. Joe? Who's that? Another beggar? No, sir. He was my teacher at the orphanage. He used to play in big concert halls a long time ago. He gave me this violin before he died. For just a second, something flickered across Vincent's face. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by that cold, mocking smile. He reached into his jacket and pulled out $100 bill. He held it up so everyone in the restaurant could see it. Tell you what, little Mila, he said loudly. I'm going to make you an offer. Play something for us. Play something that truly moves me. Not just makes me tap my foot or nod politely. I mean really moves me. Makes me feel something. He paused for effect. The whole restaurant was watching now. If you can do that, I won't just give you this money. He smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. I'll adopt you. Take you out of that orphanage. Give you a real home. How does that sound? Gasps rippled through the room. Some people looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. A woman at a nearby table whispered to her husband, "That's horrible. He's making fun of her." And she was right. Everyone knew it. Vincent wasn't making a real offer. He was playing a cruel game. He expected the girl to fail. He expected her to cry, to run away, to prove his bitter belief that hope was for fools, and the world was cold and meaningless. He wanted to crush her spirit because he couldn't stand to see hope in someone else's eyes when he had none left in his own. Mila looked at the $100 bill. Then she looked at Vincent. Her eyes searched his face for a long moment, like she was reading something written deep inside him. Then she did something nobody expected. She nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll play for you." She walked to a small clearing near the center of the restaurant. She set down her violin case and opened it carefully, like she was opening a treasure chest. The violin inside was old. One of the strings was missing. The wood was scratched and faded. The bow looked like it had been repaired many times. It was the kind of instrument that musicians would throw away without a second thought. But Mila lifted it like it was made of gold. She tucked it under her chin. She raised the bow. She closed her eyes. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Vincent crossed his arms and smirked, waiting for the disaster. And then, Mila began to play. The first note that came from Mila's violin was unlike anything anyone in that restaurant had ever heard. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fancy. It was soft, almost like a whisper. But it cut through the silence like a warm light cutting through darkness. It was the kind of sound that made you stop breathing for a second. The kind of sound that reached inside your chest and grabbed your heart. Vincent's smirk began to fade. Mila kept her eyes closed as she played. Her small fingers moved across the strings with a skill that seemed impossible for a child her age. The bow danced back and forth, pulling out notes that floated through the air like ghosts. The melody she played wasn't something anyone recognized. It wasn't a famous piece by some great composer. It was something else. Something raw and real. Later, people would wonder where she learned it. Some thought maybe Mr. Joe had written it for her. Others believed she had created it herself, from the feelings buried deep inside her young heart. Whatever it was, it told a story. The music started slow and sad. It spoke of cold nights spent lying awake in a small bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why nobody wanted you. It spoke of watching other children get picked by families, seeing them leave with smiles on their faces, while you stayed behind. Again and again. It spoke of hunger that never fully went away, of shoes that were always too small, of birthdays that nobody remembered. A woman at a table near the window felt tears forming in her eyes. She didn't know why. She had a perfect life, a rich husband, a big house, 2 beautiful children. But something about this music made her think about all the times she had complained about small, meaningless things while somewhere out there, children like this little girl had nothing. The melody shifted. It grew darker, heavier. Now it spoke of loss, of standing at a grave that was too small, of holding a photograph of someone who was never coming back. of screaming inside while your face stayed frozen because crying wouldn't change anything. Vincent felt his hands start to tremble. He recognized this feeling. It was the feeling he had buried 7 years ago when he stood in the rain at the cemetery, watching 2 coffins being lowered into the ground. His wife, his little girl, gone forever. He had locked that pain away so deep that he thought it would never surface again. But this music was finding it. This music was pulling it out, whether he wanted it to or not. An older gentleman, sitting alone at a corner table, took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. He was thinking about his brother, who had passed away last spring. They had fought over something stupid years ago and never made up. Now it was too late. The music seemed to understand that regret, that guilt, that terrible wish to go back in time and do things differently. Mila played on. The restaurant had become completely still. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the waiters had stopped in their tracks, trays still in their hands, watching this little girl in her worn-out clothes create something magical. Then the melody began to change again. Slowly, gently, something new crept into the music. It was small at first, like a tiny seed pushing through frozen ground. A hint of warmth, a touch of light. The sadness was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Hope. The music spoke of hands reaching out to help, of one kind word on a day when everything seemed hopeless, of finding a friend when you thought you were completely alone. It spoke of Mr. Joe, the old man with arthritis in his fingers, who still taught a little orphan girl to play violin because he believed she had something special inside her. It spoke of small moments of joy that made the hard days bearable. Mila's face was peaceful as she played. There were no tears on her cheeks. She wasn't performing. She was simply letting her heart speak through the strings. Vincent couldn't take his eyes off her. In that moment, something strange happened to him. For the first time in 7 years, he didn't see a beggar or an orphan standing in front of him. He saw a child, a real child with dreams and fears, and a soul that burned brighter than anyone in this room full of rich people. And he saw something else too, something that terrified him. He saw his daughter, not her face. Mila looked nothing like Rosie, but that same spark, that same innocent courage, that same way of holding on to hope even when the world gave you every reason to let go. It was all there. Vincent's eyes began to sting. His throat felt tight. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. He wanted to flip over a table and storm out and forget this ever happened. Because feeling things meant hurting. And he had promised himself he would never hurt like that again. The music reached its final moments. Mila played the last few notes, slowly, carefully, like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. The final note hung in the air for what felt like forever, then silence. For 3 full seconds. Nobody made a sound. Then the restaurant exploded. People stood up from their chairs, clapping and cheering. Tears streamed down faces. The woman by the window was sobbing openly. The old gentleman was applauding so hard his hands hurt. Even the manager, who had tried to throw Mila out just minutes ago, was standing there with his mouth open, looking stunned. "Incredible," someone shouted. "Unbelievable," said another. People started reaching into their wallets. A man threw a $50 bill at Mila's feet. Then 100 from someone else. Then more and more. Money rained down around the little girl like paper snowflakes. But Mila didn't look at the money. She looked at Vincent. He was still standing in the same spot, frozen. His face was pale. His eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen yet. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. The room began to quiet down as people noticed the tension between them. Everyone remembered the deal. The cruel bet. "Play something that moves me, and I'll adopt you." Mila lowered her violin slowly. She held it against her chest like a shield. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Did I move you, sir?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of her entire life. every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, every time she had wished for a family and been disappointed. It was all there in those 5 words. The whole restaurant waited for Vincent's answer. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at Mila. He looked at the faces around him, all watching, all expecting something. He looked at the money scattered on the floor. He looked at the violin in her hands. That broken, taped-together instrument that had just created the most beautiful music he had ever heard. And then, without saying a single word, Vincent turned around and walked out of the restaurant. He pushed through the front door and disappeared into the rain. Mila stood there, alone in the middle of the room, still holding her violin. The smile that had been forming on her face slowly faded. The hope in her eyes flickered and dimmed. She didn't cry. She was too used to disappointment for that. She simply knelt down and began picking up the money from the floor. It was more than she had ever seen in her life. It would help the orphanage. It would buy food and medicine for the other children, but it wouldn't buy her a home. As she gathered the bills with her small, trembling hands, she whispered something under her breath. Maybe it was a prayer. Maybe it was just words to herself. I thought maybe this time would be different. Outside, Vincent sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Rain pounded against the windshield. His chest was heaving. His face was wet, and this time it wasn't from the rain. For the first time in 7 years, Vincent Thornton was crying, and he had no idea what to do about it. Vincent didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor, staring out at the city lights below. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table beside him. The rain had stopped hours ago, but he could still hear it in his mind. He could still see that little girl standing in the middle of the restaurant, holding her broken violin, asking him a question he couldn't answer. "Did I move you, sir?" The words echoed in his head over and over again. Of course, she had moved him. She had done more than that. She had torn open a wound he thought had healed. She had made him feel things he had spent 7 years trying to forget. And what had he done? He had run away. Like a coward, Vincent pressed his palms against his eyes. He was a man who had built an empire. He had faced down competitors, survived market crashes, made decisions worth millions of dollars without blinking. But a 9-year-old girl with a broken violin had defeated him completely. He thought about her face, the way she had looked at him when he walked out, the hope fading from her eyes, the way she had quietly knelt down to pick up the money, as if she had expected nothing more. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She was used to it. That thought made Vincent feel sick. Around 3 in the morning, he made a decision. He picked up his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in over a year. A private investigator named Charles Webb. The best in the city. Charles answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Vincent, do you know what time it is?" "I need you to find information about someone," Vincent said. "A little girl. Her name is Mila. She lives in an orphanage somewhere in the city. She plays violin." There was a pause. "That's not much to go on." "Then dig deeper. I want to know everything about her. Where she came from, how she ended up there. Everything." Charles sighed. "This is going to cost you." "I don't care what it costs. Just find her." Vincent hung up and went back to staring at the window. Somewhere out there, in a building he couldn't see, a little girl was probably lying awake too, wondering why nobody ever wanted her. 3 days later, Charles came to Vincent's office with a folder. It wasn't a thick folder. Mila's life didn't take up many pages. But what was inside those pages hit Vincent harder than anything he had read in his entire life. Mila had been found as a newborn baby, abandoned on the steps of a small church on the south side of Chicago. It was the middle of January. The temperature was below freezing. She was wrapped in a thin blanket, barely alive. A priest found her just before dawn. A few more hours and she would have been dead. There was a note tucked into the blanket. Just one sentence, written in shaky handwriting. "Please give her music. It's all I have to leave her." Nobody ever found out who her mother was. The police searched for weeks but came up with nothing. The baby was taken to a hospital, treated for hypothermia, and then sent to the Greenwood Children's Home when no relatives came forward. She had been there ever since. Vincent read about her early years. She was a quiet child. She didn't cry much, even as a baby. The staff at the orphanage said she was easy to care for but hard to reach. She kept to herself. She didn't play with the other children much. She just watched and waited, like she was expecting something that never came. Several families had looked at adopting her over the years, but something always went wrong. One couple decided they wanted a younger child. Another family moved to a different state. A third simply changed their minds at the last minute. Each time, Mila had packed her small bag and waited by the door. Each time, she had unpacked it again and gone back to her bed without saying a word. Then, when she was 6 years old, everything changed. A new janitor came to work at the orphanage. His name was Mr. Zhou. He was 73 years old, a quiet man from Beijing who had moved to America 40 years ago. In his youth, he had been a concert violinist. He had played in famous halls across Europe and Asia, but arthritis had slowly stolen the use of his fingers, and eventually he couldn't perform anymore. He took the janitor job at Greenwood because he had nowhere else to go. His wife had passed away. He had no children. The orphanage gave him a small room and a small salary, and that was enough. One evening, Mr. Zhou was cleaning the hallway when he heard something strange. A humming sound. Soft and sweet. Coming from one of the rooms, he followed it and found Mila sitting alone on her bed, humming a melody he recognized immediately. It was Bach, a piece he had performed hundreds of times in his career. He asked her where she had learned it. She said she didn't know. She had just heard it somewhere once, and it stayed in her head. Mr. Zhou saw something in that little girl, a gift, a spark. Something rare and precious that most people would never notice. He started teaching her violin in secret. He wasn't supposed to. He was just the janitor. But every night, after his work was done, he would take her to the basement where nobody could hear. He would place his old violin in her hands and show her how to hold it, how to move the bow, how to make the strings sing. His fingers were stiff and painful. He could barely play anymore. But he could still teach. And Mila learned faster than any student he had ever seen. Within a year, she was playing pieces that took other students 5 years to master. Mr. Zhou told her she had something special inside her, something that couldn't be taught. Music chose you, he used to say. Your job is just to let it out. When Mila turned 8, Mr. Zhou's health started to fail. His heart was weak. The doctors said there wasn't much they could do. On his last day, he called Mila to his room. He was lying in bed, too tired to sit up. But his eyes were bright when he saw her. He gave her his violin, the same one he had played in concert halls across the world. It was old and worn, but it was the most valuable thing he owned. This is yours now, he said. Promise me you will keep playing. Promise me you will never give up. Mila promised. Mr. Zhou died that night. And Mila lost the only person who had ever truly believed in her. Vincent closed the folder. His hands were shaking, but there was more. Charles had included one final piece of information at the end. Greenwood Children's Home was closing down. Budget cuts from the city. Not enough funding. Not enough donations. In 30 days, the orphanage would shut its doors forever. All 41 children living there would be sent to different foster homes across the state. They would be separated, scattered. The only family they knew would be torn apart, and Mila would lose her home for the second time in her life. Vincent sat in his office for a long time after reading that. The folder lay open on his desk. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. He thought about his daughter Rosie, how she used to laugh, how she used to run into his arms when he came home from work, how she used to say that one day she would help all the sad children in the world because nobody should ever feel alone. She was 9 years old when she died, the same age Mila was now. Vincent picked up the folder and read the last page one more time. Then, he made another decision. This time, he wasn't going to run away. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the restaurant. Mila sat alone in the small courtyard behind the orphanage. her violin resting on her lap. The autumn leaves were falling around her, orange and gold, dancing in the cold wind. She watched them drift to the ground and thought about how everything beautiful eventually falls. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow, the trucks would come. The social workers would arrive with their clipboards and folders, and the children of Greenwood would be loaded up and driven away to different corners of the state. Some would go to foster homes. Others would go to larger facilities in other cities. A few of the lucky ones might even find families, but they would never see each other again. The brothers and sisters they had grown up with, the only family most of them had ever known, would become strangers. Mila had tried to be strong for the younger ones. She had told them stories at night to help them sleep. She had held their hands when they cried. She had promised them that everything would be okay. Even though she didn't believe it herself. She was 9 years old, but sometimes she felt much older than that. The money she had collected from the restaurant that night had helped for a little while. It bought medicine for Tommy, the 5-year-old with the bad cough. It bought new blankets for the little ones whose beds were closest to the drafty windows. It paid for one last birthday party for Grace, who turned 7 last week. But it couldn't save the orphanage. Nothing could. Mila lifted her violin and began to play. It was the only thing that made her feel less alone. When she played, she could hear Mr. Jew's voice in her head, gentle and calm. She could pretend he was still there, standing beside her, nodding with approval. She played a slow, sad melody, a goodbye song. For the courtyard she had known her whole life. For the cracked walls and squeaky floors. For the little bed by the window where she had dreamed so many dreams that never came true. She was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her. That's beautiful. Mila's bow stopped mid-stroke. She turned around slowly. A man was standing at the edge of the courtyard. He was wearing a long, dark coat. His hair was slightly messy, like he had been running his hands through it. His face looked tired but different somehow, softer than she remembered. It was Vincent Thornton. Mila's heart began to pound. She gripped her violin tighter, holding it against her chest like armor. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Vincent took a slow step forward. "I came to see you." "Why? So you can make fun of me again?" The words came out sharp, and Mila immediately felt bad about them. She wasn't an angry person. But something about this man brought up feelings she didn't know how to handle. Vincent stopped walking. He stood there for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he did something she never expected. He sat down on the cold stone bench across from her, not standing over her like a powerful man, just sitting, like an ordinary person. "I deserved that," he said quietly. "What I did that night at the restaurant was cruel. I was cruel. And I'm sorry. I'm a no. Sorry. I'm a no. I'm a no. Sorry." Mila stared at him. In her 9 years of life, very few adults had ever apologized to her for anything. "You left," she said. "You just walked away. You didn't even answer my question." "I know. Everyone in the restaurant was looking at me. They felt sorry for me. I hate when people feel sorry for me." "I know," Vincent said again. "And I'm sorry for that too." Mila looked down at her violin. She traced her finger along the scratched wood, along the places where Mr. Zhou had repaired it with tape and glue. "Why did you leave?" she asked. "Was my playing bad?" Vincent shook his head slowly. "No. Your playing wasn't bad. It was the opposite. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life." Mila looked up at him, confused. "Then why?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough, like the words were hard to get out. 7 years ago, I had a family. A wife and a little girl. Her name was Rosie. She was about your age." Mila watched him carefully. Something in his face had changed. The coldness was gone. He looked like a man carrying something very heavy. "There was an accident," he continued. "A car accident. I wasn't there. I was at work, making money, doing important things." He laughed bitterly. "At least I thought they were important. When I got the call, I drove to the hospital as fast as I could, but I was too late. His voice cracked. He stopped and took a deep breath. After they died, I became a different person. I shut down. I stopped caring about anything or anyone. I thought if I didn't feel anything, I couldn't get hurt again. Mila understood that. She had done the same thing, in her own way. Building walls. Keeping people out. When you played that night, Vincent said, your music broke through all those walls. It made me feel everything I had been hiding from. And I couldn't handle it. So I ran. He looked directly into her eyes. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. About your music. About the way you stood there. So brave. Even when I was being terrible to you. So I did some research. I found out about your life. About how you were left at that church. About Mr. Joe. About this place closing down. Mila felt her eyes starting to sting. She blinked hard, refusing to cry. So you came to say goodbye? She asked. Before they take us all away? No, Vincent said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I came to keep my promise. He handed the paper to Mila. She unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling. It was full of legal words she didn't understand. Big, complicated sentences. Official stamps and signatures. I don't know what this means, she admitted. Vincent smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen on his face. It means I bought this building. The whole thing. It's not closing anymore. Mila's mouth fell open. I've hired new staff, Vincent continued. Better staff. People who actually care about children. I'm turning this place into something new. A real home. And a music school. For you and for any child who wants to learn. Mila couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. All 41 children will stay together, Vincent said. Nobody is getting separated. Nobody is getting sent away. This is your home. And it's going to stay your home. Tears were falling down Mila's cheeks now. She couldn't stop them anymore. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this? Vincent leaned forward. His own eyes were wet. Because my daughter Rosie once told me that she wanted to help sad children when she grew up. She said nobody should ever feel alone in the world. He paused. I forgot that promise for a long time. But you reminded me. Your music reminded me. He reached out and gently took Mila's small hand in his. And there's one more thing, he said. That night, I told you that if you moved me, I would adopt you. I meant it as a joke. A cruel, stupid joke. He squeezed her hand. But I'm not joking now. If you'll let me, I want to adopt you for real. I want to give you a home. A family. I want to be your father. Mila looked at him through her tears. This man who had mocked her. This man who had run away. This man who had come back. Why me? She asked. Why do you want me? Nobody ever wants me. Vincent's voice broke completely when he answered. Because you're exactly the daughter Rosie would have wanted me to find. Because you have more courage in your little finger than I have in my whole body. Because your music saved my life. And I want to spend the rest of mine making sure you never feel alone again. Mila was shaking. 9 years of hope and disappointment. 9 years of waiting by the door with a packed bag. 9 years of watching other children leave while she stayed behind. Could this really be happening? She looked at Vincent's face. She looked for the cruelty. She looked for the lie. She found only love. And for the first time in her life, Mila let herself believe. She threw her arms around Vincent and held on tight. And he held her back, crying into her hair. Whispering over and over again. I've got you. I've got you. You're not alone anymore. 1 year later, the building that used to be Greenwood Children's Home looked like a completely different place. The old cracked walls had been repaired and painted in warm, cheerful colors. The leaky roof was fixed. The drafty windows were replaced with new ones that kept the cold out and let the sunshine in. There was a beautiful garden in the courtyard now, full of flowers that the children had planted themselves, and above the front entrance, A new sign hung proudly in golden letters. The Rosie Thornton Music Academy and Children's Home. Vincent had named it after his daughter. It felt right. This was exactly the kind of place Rosie would have loved. A place where children could feel safe and wanted. A place where music filled the hallways and laughter echoed off the walls. Tonight was special. It was the 1-year anniversary of the Academy's opening, and the first official recital was about to begin. The large hall that used to be a dusty storage room had been transformed into a beautiful performance space. There were rows of cushioned chairs for the audience. A small stage with velvet curtains. Soft lighting that made everything glow. People were arriving from all over the city. Some were wealthy donors who had contributed to the Academy. Others were teachers and social workers. There were journalists with cameras and notebooks, eager to write about the inspiring story they had heard. And in the front row sat the 40 children who lived at the Academy, dressed in their best clothes, buzzing with excitement. Backstage, Mila stood in front of a small mirror, trying to calm her racing heart. She was wearing a beautiful blue dress that Vincent had bought for her. Her hair was brushed and shiny, pulled back with a silver clip. In her hands, she held a violin, but it wasn't Mr. Joe's old instrument. That one was safely displayed in a glass case in her room, too precious to risk damaging. This violin was new. A gift from her father on the day the adoption became official. It was handcrafted by one of the finest instrument makers in the world. When Vincent had given it to her, he had said, "Mr. Joe gave you his heart through that old violin. Now, I'm giving you mine through this one." Mila touched the smooth wood gently. Sometimes, she still couldn't believe this was her life now. She had a room of her own with a soft bed and warm blankets. She had shelves full of books and a window that looked out over the garden. She had 3 meals a day and snacks whenever she wanted them. She had tutors who helped her with school and music teachers who challenged her to grow. But more than any of that, she had a father. Vincent had kept every promise he made. He ate breakfast with her every morning before he went to work. He came home every evening to have dinner with her and the other children. He helped her with her homework. He listened when she talked about her day. He held her when she had nightmares about the past. He wasn't perfect. Sometimes he worked too much. Sometimes he got grumpy when he was tired. Sometimes he didn't understand why she got quiet and sad for no reason. But he tried. Every single day, he tried. And that was more than anyone had ever done for her. A knock on the door made Mila jump. 5 minutes, sweetheart," Vincent's voice called from outside. "You ready?" Mila took a deep breath. Almost. She heard him chuckle softly. "You're going to be amazing. I know it." Then his footsteps faded as he walked back to his seat in the audience. Mila looked at herself in the mirror one more time. The scared little girl who had stood in that fancy restaurant a year ago. Wet and shivering, begging to play one song. Seemed like someone from a different life. She was still that girl in some ways. She still had moments of doubt. She still sometimes waited for everything good to be taken away. But she was also someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who had learned that hope wasn't foolish after all. Mr. Joe's voice echoed in her memory. "Music chose you. Your job is just to let it out." Mila nodded at her reflection and walked toward the stage. The curtains opened, and she stepped into the light. The audience fell silent. Hundreds of eyes looked at her. But Mila wasn't scared. She had played for tougher crowds. She had played for people who wanted her to fail. Tonight, she was playing for people who wanted her to succeed. She spotted Vincent in the front row. He was sitting with the other children. Little Tommy on one side, and Grace on the other. His eyes were already wet, and she hadn't even started yet. Mila smiled at him. Then she lifted her violin, raised her bow, and began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, filling the hall like a bell. Then came the second, the third, the fourth, building into a melody that seemed to wrap around everyone in the room like a warm embrace. This piece was different from what she had played in the restaurant a year ago. That music had been full of sorrow and longing. This music was different. It still had sadness in it because life always has some sadness. But woven through every note was something else. Gratitude, joy, love. It was a song about finding home. Mila played with her whole heart. She played for Mr. Joe, who had seen her gift when no one else did. She played for the children sitting in the front row, her brothers and sisters, who had taught her that family isn't about blood. She played for Vincent, the broken man who had tried to mock her and ended up saving her instead. And somewhere deep inside the music, she played for a little girl named Rosie whom she had never met but felt like she knew. A little girl who had wanted to help sad children. A little girl whose dream had somehow, through pain and loss and second chances, finally come true. The final note hung in the air like a prayer. Then silence. Then the room exploded. People leaped to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were crying openly. The children in the front row were jumping up and down, screaming her name. Grace was waving both hands in the air. Tommy was clapping so hard his little face was red. And Vincent was standing still, tears streaming down his cheeks, looking at Mila like she was the most precious thing in the world. Mila lowered her violin and walked to the microphone at the edge of the stage. "Thank you," she said softly. The room quieted down to hear her. "1 year ago, I walked into a restaurant in wet clothes with a broken violin. A man saw me and made fun of me. He said if I could play something that moved him, he would adopt me. I thought he was being mean. I thought it was just another person who would let me down." She looked at Vincent. "But I was wrong. He wasn't being mean. He was being scared. Scared of feeling things. Scared of loving someone again. Scared of getting hurt." Vincent wiped his eyes but didn't look away. "He came back for me," Mila continued. "He saved this place. He saved all of us. And he became my dad." Her voice wobbled, but she kept going. "I used to think that nobody would ever want me. I used to think that I would be alone forever. But I learned something this year. I learned that sometimes the people who seem the most broken are the ones who teach us how to heal. And sometimes the family you're looking for finds you in ways you never expect." She held up her violin. "Mr. Joe once told me that music was how hearts talk to each other when words aren't enough. So tonight, I wasn't just playing for you. I was saying thank you. To everyone who believed in me, to everyone who gave me a chance, to my father, who changed my life." She looked at Vincent one last time. "I love you, Dad." Vincent couldn't speak. He just nodded. His hand pressed against his chest. Over his heart. The audience erupted in applause again, even louder than before. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the other children were asleep, Mila and Vincent sat together on a bench in the garden. The stars were out. The air was cool and peaceful. "You were incredible tonight," Vincent said softly. Mila leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was nervous. You didn't show it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, looking up at the sky. "Do you think she would have liked me?" Mila asked quietly. "Rosie, I mean." Vincent put his arm around her and held her close. "She would have loved you," he said, "just like I do." Mila smiled and closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for something good to be taken away. She was just home, and that was enough.